Where did the slides go? I can't find my slides. Oh, okay, okay. Oh, okay, share now. Okay. I am recording, correct? Yeah, I am recording. Okay, so again, the social cognitive theory has its roots in the social learning theory, which is an education. It comes out of education. And it was built on extensive research on how children learn. Particularly, there's an experiment that was done on how children learn violence. And the idea is that children learn violence through observing others, and particularly through observing role models. So when they observe a parent or a teacher who engages in violence, they actually imitate that violence. And sometimes they improvise, but in general, children who have never done something violent before, when they observe it, then they imitate it and they start to do it. So here, this is, this theory is important because the social learning theory is important because previously there were these writings about delinquent or violent behavior as something inherent or as genetic or biological. And then the social learning theory came through problematic research that would never receive IRB approval now, basically presented evidence that children who inherently are not violent, by observing role models who commit violent acts, then become violent. So then, the behavior of role models was seen as basically a context or an environmental factor that children learn from. And then from the social learning theory, we move into the social cognitive theory, which was used, which continues to be used extensively in public health research. And basically the argument is that the individual is influenced very much by what they learn in their environment, or by what their environment allows them to do, and that the behavior of the individual changes as that environmental context changes, and as the person themselves learns new things and changes himself or herself. So then this theory basically argues that human behavior is explained as a triadic, a dynamic relationship between the person, the environment in which the person is positioned, and the behavior itself. So there is this dynamic and reciprocal interaction, which is the cognition part. Yes. Yes, it's also the social cognitive theory. I mean, again, the word cognition, cognitive, is in the title of the theory. It's all about how the individual synthesizes information based on the knowledge that they gain in their environment and the experience that they, basically, their experiences of enacting the behavior. And that's how this reciprocal relationship, basically mutual or dynamic relationship, continues to happen. Okay, the interesting thing about the theory of the social cognitive theory is that it is very convincing. And it basically, this dynamic relationship is something that researchers have been looking for or waiting for. It's sort of like the concept of intersectionality that you will read about later on in the course, that people were waiting for it. We're waiting for like a framework or an idea to help them explain basically human behavior. So they were waiting for this idea of this dynamic exchange or interchange between the person and the environment and the behavior. The problem, however, is that despite the conceptual value of this theory, the problem with it is that it is very difficult to pin down or to use in empirical research. Because the whole idea about the theory is that this change is continuous and is dynamic. When you have a change in the environment, then the person will change and the behavior will change. When the behavior changes, then the environment will change. Did I talk about this last time related to smoking and California? I think I did.
No,
Yes,
no,
doctor.
I don't remember.
Yes, doctor, you talked about it. How
Okay.
they improved the smoking status in liquid smoking, and they changed the environment.
Sure, sure. So that's an example of this dynamic change that happens where first it's one environmental policy that says we're going to, let's say in the 1970s, 1979, 1980, a policy was put in place. There's no smoking in public places in California. This policy or this environmental change influenced, then the behavior was changed. And the people who were enacting the behavior then basically had to abide by the policy, and they smoked less because the environment did not, the environment was prohibitive to smoking. Then this policy changed the person, the individuals, and the behaviors. And as these people became changed and less accepting of smoking, then it became more possible to implement more strict smoking policies in a place like California, to the point where, you know, a person cannot smoke in their own car, which is their private property, if they have a child. They will be criminalized if they do this. Okay, so again, these policies influence people. The fact that people were influenced and the rates of smoking went down, then it became much easier to enact more strict policies related to smoking. You mean there's cognitive behavioral interventions? What do you mean, Dalia, by cognitive behavioral theory? Is that from psychology?
Yes, yes, doctor. Because it's basically the same triad, يعني, reciprocal. It focuses on the cognition, on the behavior, and also on the environment. So
Yes.
I don't know if it's the same or not.
Okay, I haven't read much about the cognitive behavioral theory. I know about cognitive behavioral therapy in psychology. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay.
Okay, great. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay. Then, one of the important contributions, again, of the social cognitive theory is this construct of self-efficacy. We've read about self-efficacy in the health belief model and the theory of reason, theory of planned behavior. However, it was actually the social cognitive theory that was first, that had first presented self-efficacy as a construct. And then later on, the health belief model was modified and said, okay, we're going to add self-efficacy. And then the theory of planned behavior or the theory of reasoned action was modified, adapted, or developed into the theory of planned behavior that included perceived behavioral control, which is a very similar construct to self-efficacy. Okay, but the social cognitive theory was the theory that first came up with the notion of self-efficacy. And in addition to this dynamic interaction between the person, the behavior, and the environment, the second important construct or concept that comes out of the social cognitive theory is self-efficacy. And one of the people who developed the social cognitive theory and did a lot of research on it, his name is Albert Bandura at Stanford University. He argues that self-efficacy is probably the most important construct that researchers need to pay attention to in behavioral change. That if you have all the other components available, but you measure self-efficacy to be low in a group or in a research study, then behavioral change will be extremely difficult, despite the presence of many other constructs. Okay. The generic definition of self-efficacy is that it's basically that the person has confidence in their ability to engage in behavior. So there is a huge difference between someone who tells you, I think I can stop smoking tomorrow, and someone who tells you, I cannot stop smoking. I don't have the will, or there's something that prohibits, it can be environmental, contextual. However, I know myself and I know that I will not be able to stop smoking. There's a big difference between these two individuals. And if you have a generic smoking cessation program, and you end up with 90% of people who enroll in that program who have low self-efficacy, then your outcome is going to be low. Okay. Now, a more nuanced definition of self-efficacy is an individual's confidence in their capability to regulate their motivation, their thought processes, their emotions, and their environment in order to attain behavioral change. So the person has to be in control of their emotions. They have to be in control of their thought processes. They have to be in control of motivations. And sometimes motivations are in addictive behavior, for example, are influenced by biological factors. And then they have to have confidence in their ability to control their social environment, social and physical environment, in order to achieve behavior. Okay. So it's a pretty sophisticated construct here, and it's not easy, in fact. And there's the long process. If you want to read more on self-efficacy, there are, sometimes there are like cookbook guidelines on how to start on improving people's self-efficacy through skills building, through motivational activities, through basically how you can train someone to control their emotions, how, for example, they need to control their social environment so they don't have the stimuli, for example, to engage in the unhealthy behavior if they are going through a phase where they're working towards behavioral change. There are two important constructs also that are related to self-efficacy. Of course, you know that perceived behavioral control is very similar to self-efficacy. It's just a different terminology. There's also this term that is the mirror image of self-efficacy, and it's called learned helplessness. I think in psychology they use it. It is used also in other disciplines in terms of like in developmental psychology, for example. And this is a situation where people learn, okay, so the idea is that you want people to become more and more self-efficacious as individuals in order for them to be able to engage in behavioral change. However, there's something that can happen and that can basically counter any efforts to improve self-efficacy, and that's called learned helplessness. When people try to engage in behavior change multiple times, but they are faced with repeated failures or negative experiences, okay, then they become passive. They learn to become helpless and passive. And that is counter to self-efficacy. So that is, again, for those who will, the nutritionist, for example, or if somebody wants to work with children, and you want children to avoid violence or to not smoke, you need to be very careful, because it's very important not to subject people to repeated trials of trying to change behavior, but then there will be something uncontrollable or something in the environment that will basically lead to negative experiences, and then people become passive. So this happens, for example, in the case of wanting to lose weight. when people, let's say, are in programs to lose weight, and let's say the program is too severe, for example, you need, I don't know, I'm just giving an example, maybe it's not realistic, but let's say the person's health is really influenced by obesity, and there's this idea that they need to lose a lot of weight in a short period of time. Okay, if they fail the first week, the second week, the third week, because the goal is too extreme, they will actually give up and not try again, particularly in cases where they are not provided with the skills to be able to engage in that behavioral change. Okay, so if the goal is difficult to reach and the individual or individuals do not have the skills to be able to basically achieve small scale behavioral change, then passivity will basically reign in. Okay. Yes, so Skinner's worked on learned helplessness and also bartered women syndrome. Okay, learned helplessness is also a concept that was developed through some research that is very ethically problematic, but on animals. So I don't know if some of you know about the electric shocks, the dog and the electric shock experiments, where they subjected the dog to, it's the Skinner's experiment. Anyways, it was animal abuse. Can someone say what this experiment is about?
The Pavlov. Sorry.
The dog that no longer reacts to stimuli because they became helpless.
Yeah, it was the work of Skinner.
Yeah.
Trying to condition the animals. The dogs were put in the cages, and then they kept on shocking them with electricity. So at first they could try to run away from the cages, but with continuous attempts, like shocking the dogs with electricity, they started becoming like helpless. And even if they opened the cages, the dogs would not get out and run.
Sure.
It is also related to the battered woman syndrome, whereby a battered woman in a home, like there are several stages whereby the woman reaches at a level whereby she cannot leave the abusive marriage, and she feels like no matter what she does, there is nothing that is going to change, and maybe she starts blaming herself for being bad.
Sure, sure. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. That's very good. So yes, the idea is that the dog experiment where they were given electric shocks, and then they tried to escape the electric shock, but the door was closed, right? And then the dog got used to the electric shock, that even if the door of the cage was open, the dog just sat there and didn't try to escape. So that's learned helplessness, that sometimes when people want to engage in behavior change, but they are faced with barriers and uncontrollable events, that then they become passive. If they're not, if they can't, they try multiple times and they can't achieve their goal, they become passive and they give up. The second idea, again, and it's very much related to self-efficacy, is locus of control. And you probably have heard of locus of control in other contexts. And it's basically how the person perceives, their perception of what determines behavior. Is it internal? Does the person think that they can themselves influence their behavior and influence outcomes? Or do they think that behavioral change is external and outside their control? Now, external can be, a sign, well, in some cases, it's thinking, oh, my behavior it's not up to me, it's really up to others, and I don't have control over my behavior or over my fate. Then there's another form of external locus of control that has to do with religiosity, where there are individuals who, for example, in the case of illness, have an external locus of control, and the belief that whether I get better or whether my health improves or not is not in my hand. It's in the hand of a higher being. It's a religious belief. So it's important to think about also the internal versus the external locus of control in basically determining self-efficacy. Okay, I'm going to skip these slides because they're a little bit detailed about self-efficacy. The one thing I want to emphasize, and it's similar to what we talked about with respect to the theory of reasoned action and planned behavior, is that you really need to take, when you're thinking about self-efficacy or trying to measure it or trying to work on it in an intervention, you really need to think about the context, and you need to anchor self-efficacy into both the behavior that you are trying to measure, the behavioral change, and the context in which the individual is placed. And there's this term where you need to have anchored measures, meaning you cannot measure self-efficacy generally. Although there are writings about general self-efficacy. If you are doing a study on, let's say, sexual reproductive health, you need to measure sexual reproductive health self-efficacy in that domain. It needs to be, your measures need to be anchored into the domain itself, and it needs to be anchored into the context in which the person is in. For example, and one example related to nutrition, let's say diabetes. You cannot measure self-efficacy in a general sense if you're working with people that you're trying to help manage their diabetes. You need to think about the context. For example, are you able, if you have time and if you have the means and the resources to make your food at home, okay? In that case, tell me about your level of confidence. How confident are you to avoid food that increase your blood sugar levels? Okay, so it's not about the person being able to control their diabetes. That is too general. It's about if the person has the time, if the person has the resources and can prepare their food at home, let's say, how confident are they that they can manage and control their diabetes? Because it makes a big difference. If a person cannot prepare their food at home because they have the type of job where they have to pass by fast food and get something on the way, then they have a different context. They are in a different context than someone who has the means to buy healthy food, to spend hours at home making, preparing healthy food, and to basically eat and prepare this healthy food with the intention to control to manage and control their diabetes. I heard someone wanting to talk, or no? Okay. Okay, so there's a book called The Power of Failure about learned helplessness. And then Frank, there's all bad behavior. You're being sarcastic, right? That bad behaviors are always about external locus of control, and good one is to.
It is about a behavior. For example, if I'm able to perform a particular behavior which is good, I'm likely to appreciate myself and attach that as my achievement, that it is because I did this. But if something bad, maybe I'm not doing good in a particular behavior, then I will always blame the external factors that this is because of this that I'm behaving this way.
Okay. So these are the excuses that people usually give, is that I couldn't change my behavior because it's outside my control. But then when I'm able to change my behavior, then it's about me. It's about my my abilities and capabilities and the hard work I did and the self-control that I engaged in order to achieve that behavior.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to stop here. Actually, I had an example here related to, it's a case study from Malawi, but actually I might leave that for another idea. I have another idea for it. Maybe an assignment, maybe something, a 5-point assignment. Okay, are there any questions, quick questions about self-efficacy so I can give the floor to Mahmoud before I give the floor to Mahmoud? Okay. Great. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Isaac, you will, Isaac. I have, yeah. It's a good study. I'll share it with you.
So, doctor, you forgot about your teething.
Do you want it before or after?
It's your call.
Okay, well, I made the slight change today. Okay. So I don't have, I didn't put information here because I wanted to see what you know. Do you know what tea this is? Okay. So it is hibiscus. Yes. Well, technically it's not tea, but it's, it's sold as hibiscus tea. Okay. Do you know the Arabic word for it?
Yes, it is Karkade.
Karkade. Is it popular here? Yes.
Egyptians love it.
Yes, that's what I was going to say because it's very popular in Egypt.
And it's better to be drunk cold, as a cold drink. I've tried it both cold and hot. Cold is amazing. I mean, you should
Cold
try it one day.
is like, yeah, it's like soda, like I mean, it's like cranberry juice or cranberry soda. Yeah.
It's a bit sour, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a plant. Hibiscus is a plant, and it's very popular in Egypt. Correct. But you can buy it here. It's very difficult to find as leaves here, as the plant itself. It's sold as like tea bags. But I mean, if you read about hibiscus, I don't know how evidence-based this is. It cures hypertension, it cures skin disease, it lowers cholesterol. So I don't believe in these types of statements that one plant has these amazing properties. But apparently there is good evidence that it lowers blood pressure. That's what I read extensively. I mean, not extensively, but that's what I saw. And it improves moods. And yeah, so it's a multi-purpose, multitasking type of drink. So what is that, Antoine? Khabaisa?
Khabaisa.
Ah, I thought that was like a green plant that is eaten, edible, not drink.
Yeah,
Khabaisa is a green plant. It's not the same.
It is a green plant, but it has a flower. I'm searching for it now.
Okay.
And it has several types. This is one of them. You have a
Okay, you can check for us, please, because I never heard that before. But anyways, I do agree that it's really hibiscus is really nice cold in the summer, and you can add fruit to it as well. So I highly recommend it. Okay. So I'll stop sharing. So Mahmoud, do you have any slides that you want to share, or you just want to talk?
No, I'll share my PowerPoint.
Can you share, or do I need to make you? Oh, you can share.
I can share.
Okay. So Mahmoud is doing a PhD in nursing, and he's doing research on vaccine hesitancy. And you have 29 slides, but you have time for like 9 of them or less.
I will jump over. I mean, some
Okay.
sessions are really interesting to read about, so I will leave it for you guys to stop
Okay.
or to skip.
So you
Can you
have
see my
15.
full screen?
You have 12 to 15 minutes. Yeah, I see your screen.
Okay. So originally, my aim here is to find an association between two phenomena: influenza vaccine hesitancy and knowledge resistance. But today I will not talk about knowledge resistance at all. So half of it is off. So as an overview, influenza is caused by a virus, and there are actually two types of viruses, type A and B. We have geographical and seasonal variations. We have two types of vaccines. We have the pandemic influenza vaccine, and we have the seasonal influenza vaccine. The prevalence of influenza ranges across the region. In our Middle East, it ranges between 0.5% up to 70%. It's a respiratory infection. It's contagious 1 day before, up to 5 to 7 days after symptoms. It might lead to severe complications and admission to the hospital. So what are the benefits of the influenza vaccine? Well, they play
May
a
I
protective role.
interrupt, Mahmoud?
Yes.
Is it just from my side that your voice is so low? ولا it's not just from my side. مش عم بقدر اسمع منيح.
I can
It's
raise
me?
my voice if it's.
Sorry, ما بعرف if it's just me حدا.
I
Can
hear
you
well,
hear
but
me
yeah,
well?
if you can raise your voice a little bit, yeah.
Right, let me just.
Okay.
So this is the maximum. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so influenza vaccines, they play a protective role. They lessen the clinical severity of influenza. Clinicians, they regularly advise people to get immunized, and they specifically advise vulnerable groups like children or old age groups or pregnant or those with comorbidities. In Lebanon, we have the Vaxigriptera and the Vaccine Gripal brand names. And every year, the CDC recommends people to take these vaccines, but unfortunately, the uptake remains low. The benefits is, first of all, vaccination is a primary healthcare objective. It reduces the severity, as we have said. And in terms of cost, in the US, it saves around $117 in healthcare expenses for every dose delivered to an older adult. For an employee, it might reduce the sick leaves and the days off. And on the societal level, it promotes the herd immunity. In other words, it lessens the transmission of the disease from one individual to the other. So the impact of influenza vaccine refusal on the community is nothing to be taken easy. Seasonal influenza leads to 3 to 5 million cases of severe illnesses, and about 250,000 to half a million deaths globally are reported each year due to influenza. What is the status in the region and in Lebanon? One study stated that less than 20 doses of influenza vaccines are administered per 1,000 individuals, compared to 45 to 275 doses per 1,000 in the West. In Lebanon, the coverage of influenza vaccination does not meet the WHO recommendations. In fact, Lebanon is the only country without a policy about it. 53.4% of outpatient patients tested positive for influenza, and of these patients, 79 were admitted and 8 passed away. In other hospitals in Lebanon, we had 41 to 43% of influenza cases, and they endured severe acute respiratory infections. The average influenza rate in Lebanon was 14%, and it resulted in a 3.8% mortality rate. These are pure Lebanese studies.
Can I ask you, are these by age group or in general?
Very few studies have focused on specific age groups.
Okay.
I did not dwell into the subcategories of them, so these are general.
Okay.
My concept here is we as health educators, we disseminate health messages to the public community, but unfortunately this doesn't always guarantee that our message is well received. We often question individuals about their vaccine behavior. This is what we observe in reality. Then we evaluate their knowledge, and then we deliver this message of vaccine benefits, where to get it, etc. But unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, maybe cognitive skills of the individual, maybe the health perceptions, maybe a certain culture or belief, individuals are not compliant with vaccination. So we did some further review of literature to find concepts of vaccine hesitation. And I went first to the regional literature, and literature that was done in the region. I found the 204 studies in the region, 51 were done in Lebanon. Most of them were related to child vaccination, influenza viral characteristics, and only 2 to 3 or maybe 4 discussed vaccine behavior. And I did not find any conceptual model on vaccine behaviors in Lebanon or in the region. I can share the findings of one Lebanese study in details. I can tell you that in the study of El Khouri and Salema, and it was the first Lebanese study on influenza vaccine behavior, they reported that 69.2% of participants were aware of influenza vaccines, 65 were aware of influenza severity, 62 they were aware of influenza risk, but they did not regularly seek vaccination. So apparently knowledge was not a concern here. We have to look somewhere else, other barriers. Similar findings were also reported in other regional studies. So all suspicion, we believe that we have a case of vaccine hesitancy prevalent in our community. So the gaps in literature were simply due to the scarcity of these studies. We believe that research on influenza behavior in Lebanon is still in its infancy, and most studies haven't targeted vulnerable groups. They just went to the public, they visited pharmacies or outpatient clinics. They do not specifically focus on high-risk groups or occupational groups. So research was not focused on basic groups. So here's the deal. How do we define vaccine hesitancy? And is it really important to us? WHO recognized it as one of the top 10 global health threats in 2019. The most important thing when we are dealing with vaccine hesitancy, it depends on the context, time, place, program, and the vaccine type. It is a complex and a multi-layered phenomenon. This is a historical overview on vaccine hesitancy. I can tell you that it's not a new phenomenon. It existed ever since Edward Jenner discovered the first vaccine in 1796. Then we had occasions with the smallpox vaccination, the neurological complications associated with the DP vaccine, the link between, or the fraudulent study that linked MMR to autism. There were suspicions about the preservatives of the vaccines. And whenever a new vaccine emerged like HPV or H1N1, again, we have a new set or a new wave of vaccine hesitancy. Regarding influenza vaccine hesitancy, influenza vaccines are generally safe. Studies report that on a rare occasion, 1 in a million dose, a Guillain-Barré might be triggered, Guillain-Barré syndrome. I have an Italian study that said that 13 deaths were linked to fluad vaccine, but at later on it was refuted. It was not confirmed. But unfortunately, whenever you have these articles, the rate of vaccine hesitancy will increase and the vaccine uptake will decrease. In Lebanon, no serious adverse events were reported regarding influenza vaccines. So WHO recommends what? They recommend more research on this topic. We need to know more about the prevalence of vaccine hesitancy, the determinants of hesitancy, and set interventions accordingly. So how did they define vaccine hesitancy? It was a very broad definition, but they had to start at a certain point. First of all, WHO delegated a group, they called it the Strategic Advisory Group of Experts in 2014, and they defined it as a delay, vaccine hesitancy was defined as a delay in acceptance or refusal of vaccination despite availability of vaccination services. It occurs on the continuum, as you can see in the figure, between a total vaccine acceptance and acceptance with doubts, or acceptance with a certain delay, or refusing and denying it, denying even it exists. So here you can see that the definition here is very broad. It was not it cannot be empirically measured, at least at this stage. Okay. I am seeing a yellow box. Are you able to see it?
Yeah, where is that coming from?
I have not. It's bothering me too. So
it says, please move this window away from the shared application.
let me try and minimize everything.
Okay, now it's gone.
Okay. So what were the attempts to conceptualize vaccine hesitancy? Because the definition is really broad. We need to empirically measure it. Peretti-Wattel said that it is a transient decision-making state. So it's like a time period that a person enters and he starts to do a lot of thinking, okay? It is a stage between a decision, between a decision and an actual behavior, where you go either with an acceptance or an opposition. Peretti-Wattel said also that it's based on how and why do people come to accept or refuse or delay a vaccination. Then we have another study that followed the Anderson behavioral model of health services. They believe that it's related to population and healthcare system characteristics. Then other authors, like Brewer, said, well, we have two types of hesitancy. You have either a passive hesitancy or an active hesitancy. And he also said that vaccine hesitancy is like a social activity because, as per the social network theory, it's based on the dyadic relationship between the individual and the physician or the health practitioner, or with other individuals in the community who got vaccinated. Then a lot of studies came after. They followed the self-determination theory, health belief model, self-efficacy concept of Bandura, etc. Villan in 2016 admitted that there was a prevalent confusion and discordance regarding its definition, manifestation, and method of measurement. Some researchers claim that the current definition of vaccine hesitancy was not an empirical concept, as we said, but it was a wide range of heterogeneous or sometimes contradictory beliefs and behaviors. And all of this confusion delayed the progress in the research on vaccine hesitancy. So I went back to SAGE and I started from the beginning. SAGE, or the group of the WHO, said that the broad determinants of vaccine hesitancy was based on the 3C model: confidence, complacency, convenience. Anything that's going down, it will lead to hesitancy. But at a later point, they added another category, which is the calculation category. So confidence, I trust vaccines. Complacency, it has to do with the risk perception. Convenience, it has to do with my ability, my behavioral control. Am I able to get it available, access to it, etc. Then calculation category, which is at the how much consumption of vaccine is occurring within a certain setting. And this is like an indicator for vaccine hesitancy. So the more consumption of vaccines in a certain setting, it means that the calculation is in favor of vaccination. Then they went and developed the 5C model, which is confidence, complacency, the same. They removed convenience and replaced it with constraints, and they kept on calculation. And they added the collective responsibility, which has to do with the norms, the social norms. Is it going to benefit me versus benefit the community or the society? If it was like a nurse, is it going to benefit me and protect my patients? So this is called the collective responsibility towards vaccination. So again, these were very broad, and we wanted more in-depth details to identify what were the determinants related to these constructs. So this is the model of the 5C as per SAGE. And then they list, yes, doctor.
Yes. Do you want to tell us what your research is about?
This is actually what influenced my research.
Okay.
Okay, so will I go with 5C model? I
Okay.
consider it. Then I went to a systematic review. Actually, it's a large scale systematic review. And they did a review of 470 articles on influenza vaccination out of 13,000 plus. These guys followed the theory of planned behavior, okay? And they also followed the 4C model, and they contemplated to the work of 5 systematic reviews. And they list their determinants under, this is their model. They listed their determinants under either a physical barrier or physical determinant, or a contextual barrier, or a socio-demographic determinant. These three determinants, they influence a set of psychological determinants under which you can find risk perception, social benefit, attitude, subjective norms, and the perceived behavioral control. Based on what I read and what I saw, I constructed, and of course all the listed determinants in details, I constructed this model, okay? The way I see it is the following. Everybody, we have like a social demographic determinants. It includes our age, our education, our gender, our occupation. And we also have our physical determinants, which is like our health status, our medical condition, our lifestyle characteristics. So this can be blocked under the physical determinants. And then we have here the contextual determinants. And contextual determinants have to do with this vaccine in specific. The type, the intention of the vaccine, the access to it, and also it includes the interactions with the healthcare practitioner. You might be having a visit for an annual screening, and then the practitioner might advise you on this vaccine, like influenza. And you have the system factors also, like the availability of it and the expense or the cost of it. Whenever you have these three determinants, they trigger our knowledge or they enrich our knowledge, and knowledge with experience is what triggers our actions at a later point. So I consider knowledge and experience, which is based on all these three determinants, I consider knowledge and experience as the cues to action. So once you revise your knowledge, okay, I know about influenza vaccine, I know I should take it, I know its indications. And once you remember, for example, in your past experience that, okay, I took the influenza vaccine last year, you go on and move into a series of psychological determinants. And under psychological determinants, this is where you start to cook things up. You compare risk perceptions, the risk of having influenza versus the risk of not getting the vaccine, the severity of the disease. Then you say, well, what is it for me and what is it for my society, the social benefits of it. Then I check my norms. So all these fall under the psychological determinants. And based on what I read, vaccine hesitancy will start at this stage, because this is the decision-making stage that the authors stated. They have to start to make a decision. They are comparing all these perceptions. They are comparing it against their behavioral control. They follow a certain attitude. It could be an emotional attitude. It could be a cognitive attitude. And it results into an intention. So this intention is when they decide, well, I should take it or not take it. But again, this time, between the way they make the decision or the decision of vaccine hesitancy stage, it might take 1 second, it might take days, or it might not happen. And sometimes you advise an individual that this is good for you. He might tell you okay right away, or he might leave and think about it. So this is why I said that instead of putting vaccine hesitancy as an individual box, I would refer to it as a timeline or a stage that an individual passes through, and it will eventually lead into one of the three outcomes, either a compliance or acceptance, or a delay or a refusal, which is the actual behavior. The reason I included intention with vaccine hesitancy, doctor, is because Brewer said they overlap. Intention and reluctance and motivation and hesitancy, they overlap with each other. You cannot separate them. That's why I consider vaccine hesitancy starts from the moment that you have the knowledge until you make the decision. Because if you don't have the knowledge here, you will have no idea about influenza vaccines. So if I tell you, for example, have you got your salmonella vaccination? You will tell me, no, I haven't thought about it. I haven't thought about the risk of it. simply because you don't know about salmonella vaccine, and in reality we don't have anything like a salmonella vaccine. I just created it. So if you don't have knowledge about it, you have no cue to think about it. And if you have no cue to do this action or get vaccination, then you will not pass through this stage, and you will not go into a behavior which is either a delay or compliance or refusal. This is in
Great.
brief. I try to squeeze everything in. And you can
That's
challenge me
great.
with this. I can add also that some said that whenever you have a gap between intention and compliance, or this delay, they call it a state of inactivity. And the person is not yet sure where to go to get vaccination, or just to think of it for a longer time. And some call it as a state of inactivity.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. I think much of what you presented also applies to COVID, to our our attempts to try to understand.
I have a say with COVID, doctor. I have, because based on what I read.
Yeah.
I will be very careful when I do any study regarding to a new vaccine like a COVID vaccine. Remember, there are a lot of contextual determinants. And for COVID, for example, it's not convenient for all the public. So in terms of convenience, we cannot measure it at this stage. It's only restricted for healthcare practitioners. We are not sure about its cost. Is it going to be free, or is it going to be worth something? And even the origin of COVID-19 vaccine, is it from Russia? Is it from China? Is it from Oxford, Britain? So people still have this political overview about vaccines, that they might think, this vaccine might be better than the other. So in my personal humble opinion, unless you are very specific with the vaccine type, this model is not really going to be reflective, because you have a variety of determinants, contextual determinants related to the type of the vaccine itself.
Right.
One more thing, in the COVID-19, you know that it not go over the stages of trials, the 1, 2, 3, and this might be a concern for some individuals. And people might be observing other individuals who got vaccinated. Is it safe? Is it not? So the risk perception might change over time, So if you do the study like today, and you do it like after 3 months, it will be different.
Right.
This is like a couple of opinion regarding COVID vaccination.
Okay,
But,
great. Thank you.
I have to admit that currently in my dissertation, it's in an early stage, so everything
Okay.
is being critiqued, everything is being
Yeah.
modified.
Yeah.
I'm sure this will not be the final form after 3 years, so
Okay.
things
Good.
change.
And you need to
But
think
I'm
about
open
what
for your-
data.
I'm open for your feedback, of course.
Yeah. Thanks. This is really good. It's very helpful, because I'm also thinking about the COVID vaccine, and we have collected some data on COVID vaccine hesitancy now. One thing is the flu vaccine. I mean, because what I've read in the past is mostly on childhood vaccinations and parents' decisions to vaccinate a child or not. And what explains, the anti-vaxxer parents. And the idea, one thing that you mentioned is that it's very, the vaccine hesitants are a very diverse group of people. They're people who are very high socioeconomic status who don't want to vaccinate because they think it's bad for health. And then there are people who don't understand the vaccine, have low socioeconomic status. So, yeah.
I want to add, Doctor.
Yeah.
And just to give you a hint about how much you should be specific, the systematic review of SCHMED in 2017, they were targeting influenza vaccines.
Yeah.
But within their study, they split it and they stratified by either pandemic or seasonal influenza vaccine. Then they split it again for health practitioners versus the public. Then they split it again either for older group or younger group. So we have to be very careful when we generalize the contextual determinants of a study of a vaccine, because we have to be targeting this population and only generalizing it within its context.
Absolutely.
So vaccination in Pakistan is different from vaccination in Lebanon, different from vaccination in US. So this has to be tabulated on in your setting when you present your study.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to think about the influenza vaccine, because most people in the population think that it's important for the elderly. Why should I go and take the vaccine if, you know, I had a flu last year, it was a few days and I'm feeling good. It's, you know, it's a threat for people who are old and frail. So that's another factor as well. I don't have much to add because actually some of the things you mentioned on the vaccine, the flu vaccine, I've had in the slides, which I will post on my slides, which I will post on Moodle. But I also, I just want to share my screen just to say a couple of words.
For Edward Jenner, I just have to say that it did some ethical violations.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Some might not feel, let me stop sharing.
He, so Jenner introduced chicken pox to a little boy without, the boy could have died.
He actually took the length of a cow infected with smallpox, and he rubbed it to an inflicted wound of a child.
Yeah.
يعني we cannot give him credit from the ethical part, but at that time in 1700s they didn't have needles and injections, so he started the first step in vaccine discovery. So this is the only credit to give him.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. We will end at 10 minutes after 5, but I just want to thank you, Mahmoud. This is very helpful for me. I hope it was helpful for others. I wanted to mention that also based on some readings, not extensive as Mahmoud, because that's not my area of research, some of the factors that influence parents' decisions to vaccinate their children or not. Again, the anti-vaxxers are a heterogeneous group of people who have different ideologies and thoughts about vaccines. But the factor, it's very tricky because actually incidence of an infectious disease is one of the determinants of parents' decision to vaccinate or not. And this is tricky because incidence is low because of vaccination in something like polio, or there's no polio in most countries around the world except for a couple of countries because of the vaccination. So the idea that, oh, there's no polio, so why should I vaccinate my child against polio is, you know, from a public health point of view, is something that we need to address as well. The issue of susceptibility is also critical. If you think about the HPV vaccine and HPV, the human papillomavirus, is transmitted through sexual intercourse. And the idea that parents of children will refuse the HPV vaccine because they believe that, of course, my child is not susceptible to HPV, not the child, but when the idea is that the vaccine should be given at a younger age so that it protects the child when they engage in sex in adolescence or later. So here, susceptibility in HPV is an important concept to understand. The vaccine characteristics as well are very important, or at least for some groups that would make a distinction between an attenuated virus versus, I don't know, versus a protein virus versus what we are reading right now, you know, do I want to take a messenger RNA? There were like these perceptions that, oh, the messenger RNA is going to go into my genetic makeup and mess things up and cause problems. And, you know, you have to, then the vaccine people would have to go out and explain that it's not going to go into your, you know, your DNA and change it. Trust, Lamia, you mentioned that, yes, absolutely, trust is a very important factor in vaccine. And now with the COVID, you know, in Lebanon and in many other parts of the world, not just Lebanon, there's a problem of trust because people, the populations do not trust how their governments handled COVID. And this is going to trickle into, you know, the COVID vaccine distribution and rollout. Practicalities. I don't know if you've read the article on Sudan and the measles vaccine. What they're trying to do is, if they open a vial, they want to finish the vial. So they don't want to have one person come to the clinic and open a vial for that one vaccination. So they ask all people to bring their children on one day of the week. And then if it's inconvenient for the parents to bring the child on that day, they just want to come whenever they want, then that's a problem. Another interesting thing is the same in Algeria. Another interesting thing that I read is that actually, and this is a very cognitive process as well, is that there are emotional issues related to vaccinating a child, particularly if the vaccine is new. And if there are these, like, if there are these suspicions that the vaccine is going to harm the child. Let's say in the case of polio, the live attenuated polio. If people hear that the live attenuated polio vaccine may cause the death of 1 in a million children from the vaccine, the parents, in fact, feel more guilty if their child died from the polio vaccine than if the child died from polio itself. And this is based on some studies that it's not specific to polio, but this idea that if my child gets polio and dies from it, then maybe that's, you know, was meant to happen. Maybe that's the will of God. Maybe that's, you know. However, if I vaccinate my child and then my child dies from the vaccine, then it's my mistake, my fault. I'm the one who caused this death. So there are these issues that play into, because it was their decision to vaccinate, absolutely. So there are these factors that are at play in terms of parents' decisions to vaccinate. I just want to show you what data we have very quickly in the next 2 minutes. This is a study. I'm not going to go over the methods. Maybe at some point later on, I'll introduce you more to the study. It's a longitudinal study that we're doing on COVID and older Syrian refugees in Lebanon and their ability to basically cope, or tracking their ability to adhere to COVID preventive measures, but also cope with the fallout of, you know, social isolation and not being able to work and not, yeah. So what we asked them in wave 3, this is a longitudinal study, what we asked them in wave 3 is this question: if an effective and safe COVID-19, there's supposed to be the word vaccine, if an effective and safe COVID-19 vaccine becomes available for free, would you take it? This question was asked in January, actually. And then they could say yes, no, and don't know. And we asked about sociodemographics. We have data on sociodemographics. We have data on underlying health conditions, hypertension and diabetes. We have data on perceptions of vaccine efficacy in general. Do you believe vaccines are effective? Do you believe vaccines are safe? And we have questions on perceived severity of COVID and perceived susceptibility to COVID and adherence to preventive measures. What we found is that 66% of older Syrian refugees over 50 years of age say that they will take the vaccine if it's effective and safe and if it's provided for free. 66%. This is much higher, actually, than the Lebanese population based on some data that's been out. Yes, this is good. It's higher than in Jordan. It's higher than among Lebanese, but I'm not sure about the data in Lebanon yet, because I think the data that I saw was based on data collection company, not the university research. This was before even the vaccine was rolled out. Yes, of course, we want to get 80 to 90% of the people vaccinated. for herd immunity. Okay, then what we found is that, okay, let me tell you the story. What we found is place of residence. People who live in camps and refugee camps were more likely to say, yes, I will take the vaccine. Maybe because there's more crowding, there are more concerns for people who live in the camps. And then people who had better perceptions or perceptions that vaccines are effective and safe were more likely to say, I will take the COVID vaccine. What I was surprised with, and this is really important from a health promotion point of view, is that older, like the 70 and older refugees, and those who have hypertension and diabetes were not more likely to be willing to take the vaccine, which is not good, because I was expecting that people who have underlying conditions and who are afraid of the severe outcomes of COVID, and people who are older will be more likely, will say, yes, I will jump on the vaccine as soon as it is made available. But that was not the case in our data, which is not good. Maybe they're afraid of complications of the vaccine. Yeah, but yeah, this result is needs to be addressed because people with chronic conditions and older ages should receive the vaccine and should be more concerned actually about the vaccine. Yes, go ahead, Mahmoud. You will have the last word because I'm done. I don't have anything else to say.
Sorry for keeping you for one more minute. The issue is in the systematic review of SMED, they only accounted a significant determinant of vaccine behavior if it was found significant in at least 6 studies. So they put like a criteria. One of the conclusions in socio-demographics and physical determinants were not always in a linear association with vaccine behavior. So they were not conclusive. They were not really associated at all times. Simply because between having a hypertension or diabetes and doing the behavior, you have these contextual psychological determinants that are going on. So the way they saw it, focus on the psychological determinants. This is what really implies a vaccine behavior or not. This is really what's associated with the behavior.
Okay, that's very interesting to focus on the psychosocial
And contextual and the psychological.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. I actually wanted to let you know that there is going to be a webinar on COVID vaccine, but it actually conflicts with our class. So I can't attend it myself. So yeah, and I can't advertise it for you. But maybe it will be recorded. I can email the organizers and ask if it's recorded, and I can send you the link. Okay, thank you, Mahmoud, and thank you everyone for being here and engaging really nicely. Again, over the weekend, if you have any questions about the paper, email me. Okay? Okay. See you. Bye.
Thank you, Doctor.
Bye, Doctor.
Bye.